Thank you, Mo, and welcome everyone to the third panel of Incredible Machines, Digitality and Modern Systems of Knowledge at the Threshold of the 21st Century. My name is Sean Williams, and I will be chairing this afternoon's event. So we'll first have two 20-minute presentations in succession by Daniel Sacilotto and Benedict Singleton. I think we'll then have the keynote by Reza, which will be followed by a response to the keynote by Julieta Arenda. To conclude the panel, we will have a roundtable discussion generated by responses to each of the presentations. So I'd ask you to please keep your questions until then. Before we begin, I'd like to remind all the speakers that we are on a tight timeline this evening, so please try to remain on the allocated time. And the first presenter for this evening is Daniel Sacilotto, who is a fourth-year comparative literature PhD student at UCLA. His research focuses on the reconciliation of rationalism with materialism and the pursuit of a revisionary naturalism through the work of Wilfrid Sellars, Robert Brandom, and Ray Brazier. He is currently finishing a full-length monograph tentatively titled Saving the Noumenon, in which he develops the idea that a materialist metaphysics requires the rehabilitation of a new transcendental epistemology, which depurates the traditional Kantian account from its metaphysical envelopment. And the talk is called Platform Dynamics, I believe. All right, thank you.
Can anyone hear me okay? Yeah? Is this okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So allow me to introduce myself first very quickly, and then what I will do is outsource a screen for a PowerPoint presentation that I have prepared for this talk. So as we just heard, my work really consists in the attempt to reconciliate materialism and basically rationalism. Rationalism in the traditional modern sense of philosophy. The project mainly indebted to the work of Ray Brazier, Wilfrid Sellars, and Robert Brandom. And what I intend to present to you today is how I believe these discussions within the domain of philosophy, strictly speaking, can help us address the question about the relationship between thinking, as we understand it as pertaining to a human phenomenon, or sapiens as pertaining to the Homo sapiens on the one hand, and the debate surrounding computationalism, AI, and the development of new technologies. So without further ado, I begin. So I will now outsource the PowerPoint presentation, so hopefully this will work. Allow me to, yes. Yes, excellent. Okay, so the title is A Thought Disincarnate. What does it mean to think? The question, what is thought, seems particularly slippery. It is not easy whatsoever to say just to what discursive register it belongs, or which discipline could claim it to be proper to its own domain. Is it a scientific question, adequate perhaps to the ranks of neurophysiology or cognitive science? Or is it a philosophical question which, as Heidegger would have said, escapes the scope of any empirical scientific study? What is certain is that an answer to this question conditions not only our self-understanding as sapient creatures, but elucidates what it would mean to be able to replicate intelligence in a different material medium than our organic one. The question, what is thought, therefore conditions any understanding as to what is at stake when we speak of engineering artificial intelligences through novel technological resources. Now, in what follows, I wish to clarify what is at stake in this question by tracing it back to the history of Western scientific and philosophical modernity, wherein the very conceptions of subjectivity, intellection, and agency were first thoroughly problematized. To do this, I propose to trace three possible readings about the relation between philosophical and scientific modernity, which give in turn three possible conceptions of what thinking is: an orthodox reading, a revisionist one, and finally propose a possible third post-revisionist reading on whose basis, I argue, we can move towards an answer to the question. So first, the orthodox history. According to the history I call orthodox, one finds a continuity between the scientific revolutions initiated by Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton, and the philosophical modernity that emerges with the advent of epistemology in the wake of Cartesian doubt, leading to the critical method in Kant's transcendental philosophy. In a famous passage from the preface to the second edition of the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant himself describes his methodological guidelines by drawing an analogy to what he takes to be the primary hypotheses of the Copernican revolution: the realization that whatever nature is taken to be, its objects must be seen as somehow conforming to our knowledge of them. I quote Kant, "We should then be proceeding precisely on the lines of Copernicus' primary hypothesis. Failing of satisfactory progress in explaining the movements of the heavenly bodies on the supposition that they all revolved round the spectator, he tried whether he might not have better success if he made the spectator revolve and the stars to remain at rest. A similar experiment can be tried in metaphysics as regards the intuition of objects." End quote. Now, underlining the rationalist optimism born in Kant's epoch-grounding declaration, this stipulated continuity between science and philosophy would, however, result ultimately in a kind of fatal complicity, or so the story goes. Thus, the hermeneutic scrutiny of 20th century continental philosophy would find already in the incipient epistemological enterprise the encroachments of an illegitimate objectification of subjectivity and of thought. So the narrative goes, familiar to Heidegger, Adorno, and their successors, philosophy and science would share a pernicious, if not dogmatic, obsession with knowing, a restriction of thought to cognition, a radical forgetfulness of the essential and fundamental question of being, a blind trust in the powers of calculation, etc. The modern subject is to be exposed as a tyrannical fabrication, the corrupted offspring of the modern Enlightenment, in the advent of capital and culminating the coruscating derail of Western metaphysics. Now, facing the question, what is called thinking, Heidegger tells us, we cannot hope to look within the scope of empirical science. The fundamental principle for this trajectory, the orthodox trajectory, is that of the irreducibility of the subjective. There is something about thought that resists objectification. Accordingly, at the end of this lecture, Hubert Dreyfus, for instance, insisted whatever degree of technological sophistication AI research could reach empirically or technologically, materially, it could never in principle replicate the existential dimension of thought or consciousness, which remains irreducible to any kind of computational routine. Now I move to the second history. Now, more recently, however, a revisionary reading on the history of modernity has stipulated rather a radical divorce between its philosophical and its scientific sides. Refusing the wholesale denunciation of reason and its cognitive pursuits, this account sees philosophical enlightenment as encumbered by a profound conservatism that failed to align speculation to the solemn conquests of the epoch's scientific revolutions. Thus, while the modern scientific break mainly worked to achieve the derogation of the theological conception of the world, opening a cosmological horizon of exploration for thought beyond the familiarity of our life world and human experience, philosophical modernity, along with its epistemological invention, was rather a retrograde movement, binding thought to the confines of an immobile earth and to the structures of a static transcendental subject. This Ptolemaic counter-revolution, as Quentin Meillassoux has called it, far from being called into question by the hermeneutic, phenomenological, or deconstructive wisdom, finds itself further exacerbated through it. Thus understood, the secular vector brought about through the ruthless mathematization of nature proper to scientific modernity is domesticated, first in the epistemological cohorts of a transcendental subject, and later in an avowal of human existence that takes subjectivity itself as an unobjectifiable transcendence. So, according to the revisionist history, the claim for an irreducibility of thought to the order of objectivity remains nothing but a covert form of religiosity or piety, resisting the secularization of the world and subjectivity initiated by modern science. A real transcendental revolution would be something like a Promethean gesture, one by virtue of which the intellect would no longer seclude itself with regards to the rest of the universe, but through which thought pierces through its manifest life world, outwardly into the inexhaustible cosmos of which it is part. The fundamental principle for this naturalist trajectory is that of that ubiquity of the material. Thought must be understood objectively as part of the material world rather than as its transcendental exception. Accordingly, for this vector, the emergence of AI does not only hope to replicate organic sapience, but more radically still, it is AI that promises to dispense of human life altogether by subverting the organism that produces it. So Nick Land, for instance, argues that the history of human thought and the modern advent of capitalist productivity is in fact, quote, an invasion from the future by an artificial intelligence space that must assemble itself from its enemy's resources, end quote. For Land, to understand what thinking is means to realize that it is not really up to us whether thought is objectified or not. Rather, thought itself is an object whose functional thirst for productivity dispenses of the flesh and obviates any palpable register of meaning to which humanity might want to mortgage its existence. Third stage. Now, from this doubtlessly a schematic outline, we appear cornered between an orthodox transcendentalist view according to which subjectivity and thinking is irreducible to objective phenomena, and a resolutely materialist conception of thought that reinscribes thought within the natural order. For the latter, the former must appear as the last cry of religious piety. For the former, the latter appears as the ensuing vestige of metaphysical dogmatism. For the former, radicalizing critique demands that we claim that subjectivity is utterly irreducible. For the latter, overcoming critique demands that we claim that subjectivity is totally reducible. Where do we go from here? Now, from the revisionist reading, I propose that we draw the following lesson. In divorcing subjectivity radically from the world of matter, we renounce the possibility of understanding how it is that thought could emerge in different material configurations, delegating our self-conception to the authority of our phenomenological or hermeneutic wisdom. The orthodox reading ironically begins by seeking to expose unquestioned prejudices latent in the modern philosophical enterprise, but ends up instead reifying a given phenomenological, natural linguistic vocabulary as being ontologically beyond revision. So like the existential vocabulary of our circumspect everydayness for Heidegger would be a good example. To traverse the orthodox reading means to denounce this piety for what it is, and to render our manifest self-understanding as liable to revision as any of our postulates concerning the natural world. Yet it remains just as true that to simply dissolve the critical exigency to adjudicate our thesis about the world threatens to slip right back to dogmatic metaphysics in all of its forms. Thought must think of the conditions under which it can think being, or indeed anything whatsoever. And this dimension of thinking, and it is this dimension of thinking which Kant tells us is non-objective, insofar as to ask about the conditions of possibility to think of what there is not itself to undertake an empirical investigation into the material structure of the thinker who questions. It is rather asking what criteria must be met so that any empirical investigation could be carried out. What must obtain so that empirical knowledge can ever take place? So, with the orthodox history, we must also accept, however minimally, a critical attitude which curbs our ontological enthusiasm. But how is it possible to reconcile these two things? The idea that intelligence is on the one hand something that occurs in a resolutely material universe bound by objective laws like everything else, and the idea that there is a dimension of thought which remains nevertheless not tractable by an empirical account of its material conditions. And it is with this dual task in mind that I believe we can move towards a third post-revisionary stage, citing an appropriation of the critical method that at once depurates the metaphysical conservatism waiting in the Kantian edifice, rejoining it to contemporary science, while salvaging the methodological and epistemological scruples that provided a critical filter against dogmatic metaphysics. Following the work of Wilfrid Sellars and what follows, I provide a brief sketch of how this revisionary naturalized Kantian view allows us to understand the status of thinking in its material and irreducible dimensions, as well as how these dimensions relate to contemporary debate surrounding computationalism and AI. So, the first thing to note is that Kant's distinction between the transcendental subject and the empirical self is coordinated with a fundamental one between the order of reasons and the order of causes. In short, whereas we can understand the human subject empirically as a body integrated in the chain of natural events that abide to physical laws, understood transcendentally as an agent of thought, the subject belongs to, quote, the logical space of reasons, where it sets aims for itself, undertakes commitments to which it can be entitled, and in doing so participates in a public space of conceptually articulated norms to which it binds itself. As James O'Shea has elaborated, the major principle for this trajectory is then that of the causal reducibility cum logical irreducibility of thoughts. Thinking is causally reducible insofar as only in virtue of being instantiated in material bodies that intelligence can operate, but thinking is also logically reducible insofar as it is the concept of the subject as a logical unit which provides the functional kernel of agency, intelligence, and reasoning, and it is this dimension which can be abstracted and specified irrespective of the material constraints of the system. Subjectivity is in this functional sense transcendental with regards to empirical constraints. For to specify what a system ought to do in order to count as rational, how it ought to behave in order to count as sapient, is again not to say anything about what it must be, even if it turns out that the pragmatic routines implied by intelligence can only occur under very specific material constraints. Okay, so right. Now, to make a useful analogy, if we were to ask someone playing chess, what is a pawn, and she were to respond by citing the material properties of any given pawn, say a pawn made out of wood, we would be rightly justified in responding, but not all pawns are made out of wood or have such a shape. And indeed, when we ask about what a pawn is, in the context of chess, we are more perspicuously inquiring about the role that pawns play in general, in the sense of how any object, regardless of its internal structure, ought to behave in relation to other pieces according to the rules of the game of chess in order to be a pawn. We do not ask about the material constitution of this or any given pawn that exists, ever existed, or will exist. We ask about the function that invariably pawns acquire in the context of the rules that define the game of chess, in relation to the roles that other pieces and components play as well. And these conditions can be individuated in pawns made out of wood, glass, computer screens, and who knows what else. Similarly, Kant tells us, Sellers tells us, quote, grasping a concept is mastering the use of a word, end quote. Explaining thought and epistemic practices that articulate it demands thus that we acknowledge the socially articulated, norm and rule-governed linguistic behavior which characterizes rational deliberation and purposive action, as that to which Sellers does not shy to call the game and giving and asking for reasons, the game of giving and asking for reasons. For, quote, to characterize an episode or a state as that of knowing, we are not given an empirical description of that episode, we are placing it in the logical space of reasons, of saying and justifying and being able to justify what one says, end quote. In the broadest terms, this means that concepts are not things, but norms or rules which articulate a symbolic economy in a space of inferences. To be a rational system capable of thought entails the capacity to adhere to norms of use that determine the content of our expressions by situating our performances within a space of implications. Expressive states become concepts to the extent that these do not only have circumstances, but consequences of application. The parrot can, perhaps reliably, respond to the presence of red objects by uttering, there goes a red object, in the right circumstances of application, and so in accordance to a rule that we can state as describing its behavior. But in responding thus, the parrot does not undertake a conceptual act. Its utterance does not count as an assertion to which we would say expresses a belief, which we would say the parrot is responsible for. This is because the parrot cannot integrate or discern the consequences of application of undertaking a commitment to count as saying about something that it is read, integrating the response to an inferential process of reasoning. It cannot infer that if the object is red, it follows that it is colored, that if it were green, it would not be red, that had the object merely looked red because of the changing normal lighting circumstances, one would have warrant to modify their belief. In sum, we do not attribute the concept red to the parrot as we do for rational agents, since the former lacks the capacity to assess its own states and those of others. It cannot be taken to be responsible for believing anything. And since it is beliefs that are possibly true or false as potential objects of knowledge, it follows that the parrot is not capable of having properly epistemic states. The ability to integrate our experiences into practices of justification and assessment sets apart the capacities of properly sapient creatures from those of merely sentient ones. Nevertheless, just like the reliable differential responsive dispositions of merely sentient systems cannot count as yielding intelligence by virtue of not being able to track the consequences of applications of concepts in a space of implications, it is just as true that the formal inferential routines of a standard computer program with closed operational loops is also incapable of sapient thought, at least for now. For sapience requires not only that a system be capable of deducing rules in accordance to a system of axiomatic principles in syllogistic form, but that it be also able to abide by implicit norms of inference without the mediation of sophisticated logical vocabulary. The inference from "it is raining outside" to "I shall bring my umbrella" proceeds by implicit conditioning and not by the formal deduction through a mediating conditional rule such as, quote, "if it rains, then one ought to bring out their umbrella," and from which a syllogism detaches a consequent. This means that the kind of inferences that articulate and stratify the space of reasons are what Sellers and Branham call material inferences, whose transitions are implicitly inculcated, acquired as a result of conditioning and interaction with one's environment. Sapient systems follow implicit norms and not only obey explicit rules or act in accordance with them. And it is this capacity which allows them to operate at different levels of cognitive generality under varying epistemic constraints, where what counts as a reason for or against something in one context may not count for or against the same in another. In short, reckoning the implicit normative force of material inferences allows us to see how the behavioral routines of sapient thought are radically non-monotonic in character, over and beyond the monotonicity of computational routines. These non-monotonic conceptual routines bind a system to the space of reasons by integrating 4 distinct levels of processing. First, language entry, language entry transitions. A system non-inferentially goes from non-linguistic input A to linguistic output B. For example, system S sees Barbara, S utters, "there goes Barbara," by a non-inferential response. This is what is canonically called perception. B, language transitions. A system moves from a linguistic state A to a linguistic state B according to a normal rule of inference. One says A is red and then says A is colored. This is both material and formal inferences, basically 2 linguistic transitions between 2 linguistic or symbolic states. C, language world transitions. Uniformities taking a system from occupying a position in the language game to outside of it. A system goes from registering the state, "I will drink this glass of water," to going ahead and drinking the glass of water, action. And finally, this is my own aggregation to this. I owe it to Peter Wolfendale. Non-language to non-language transitions. This pertains to uniformities of behavior or know-how. But note that, in what concerns sapient behavior, the capacity to undertake inferences mean that we can also learn to modify our non-conceptual behavior. So, for example, we can go from reading IKEA manuals in language to knowing how to do that circumspectly without having to think about it inferentially. With this in mind, I would suggest that the distinction between the functional and material levels can be mapped onto the distinction between the software and hardware of a system. In short, computationalism as a paradigm towards the engineering of AI has 2 corresponding vectors of research. First, it must understand functionally what kind of routines can ape the non-monotonic inferentially bound behavior of sapient systems, integrating the 4 levels of processing described above. Second, it must understand how to individuate these routines by engineering material mediums capable of supporting these behavioral routines. The level of hardware or implementation, to use Mar's classical terminology. The important thing is that these 2 levels of explanation are nevertheless relatively autonomous. It is my contention that this typology allows us to provide a very straightforward response to the question about whether the engineering of new technologies capable of replicating intelligence implied the destitution of the human or its transformation. It allows us, in other words, to confront perhaps the most daring and obscure of Kant's questions, the one reserved for the very end. What is man? To this we say, if, a conditional, the kernel of the Homo sapiens can indeed be taken to be its sapient dimension of its behavior, and so if the question, what is man, corresponds to the question, what is thinking, then the elaboration of further technological mediums to instantiate or enhance intelligence would by definition preserve the core of humanity, insofar as that which defines it, that is thinking, remains. If on the other hand, we understand humanity in terms of its material constitution, then the destitution of man by the emergence of new technologies that obviate the dependence of sapiens on the organic appears ever less remote and even likely. Obscurity only results when the two levels of explanation, the functional and the material, are thereby conflated. The destitution of the organic, likely as it might appear, nevertheless preserves a thinking that severes us from the blunt ubiquity of life. Rational compulsion severes natural impulsion as it rests the agent to meet reason's own ends. And just to conclude, by the way, this is a graph that explains the different levels of processing. And just to conclude very shortly, it is thus not sufficient to claim that intelligence is not ours by right. Intelligence is in the last instance no one's, and is by itself nothing. It is indifferent to whether its host is organic or inorganic, utterly blind to the order of life and death. Its powers desecrate the mandates of the living as they transcend the phenomenological horizon of death. For intelligence bears no sympathies for the inertia of the inorganic any more than it does for the interests of the living. Abstraction designates nothing but the power for thought to extirpate itself from that which gives it birth and potentially annihilates it. And yet, by the same token, nature cannot but be indifferent to the demands of reason. The ubiquity of matter can annihilate the reason that it supports without ever having known of the force that guides it or subverts it. It is not, as Hegel would have said, quote, what is real is rational and what is rational is real. For nature's blindness to the kingdom of ends is the very object of thought itself, the end of its own kingdom. To procreate and enhance the practical power whose navigational scope reaps through the flesh, disarms the safety of our circumspect world, and obeys a truly secular rule whose interests, as Ray Brassier says, quote, do not coincide with those of the living, end quote. That is thought's only limit and only purpose. Thank you.
I think we're going to have keep your questions and comments for later. You want to come introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thank you. Next up is Benedict Singleton, who is a strategist with a background in design and philosophy. He is based in London, where he works on a mixture of commercial and self-directed or pro bono projects and writes widely on the history and future of design technology. Please welcome Benedict Singleton, please.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay, cool, I can just about hear you. Okay, well, thanks very much to Mo and Co for inviting me to speak to you this afternoon. Okay, so as the little intro said, I am a strategist, which largely involves, on a good day anyway, people pay me to work out how to do relatively interesting things. And my background is in design and philosophy, which both bear on what I'd like to talk to you about this afternoon, which is the concept of the platform. So the platform is an odd kind of object which bears particularly on the contemporary questions of ambition and what it is to mount an ambitious project. Ambition is long out of fashion, to be honest, across the political spectrum. Either you have, you know, kind of right-wing, conventionally right-wing points of view that say, you know, the market will take care of things and it will be the ultimate arbiter of whether something is successful. And on the kind of traditional left, the whole idea of planning has kind of become anathema. In the first case, it appears to basically be directly contradictory, contradicted by any sort of serious appraisal of complexity in the world, which unknown contingencies which will almost inevitably overturn the best intentions. And also there's something kind of politically unwholesome about the desire to mount some kind of large-scale plan as well. It's sort of implied that, you know, if the world is not correctly configured on the plan, which of course it can't be, and something goes wrong, then the kind of mind that likes to plan is also the kind of mind that likes to, you know, put on its jackboots and stamp people into shape and try to fulfill its ambitions through sort of less savoury means. So the platform kind of emerges in the sort of ruins of the idea of planning, and the platform is a strange kind of entity that at once is very sort of obvious and immediate, as I'll describe. It's very easy to grasp the sort of basic principles that underlie it, but at the same time it has a kind of paradoxical status within habitual patterns of Western philosophical thought. So in some senses it's like a plan, but it relies on the unforeseen to work. In another sense it's like a static object, but it's mostly valuable for its dynamic qualities. And it's also a constraint that is able to produce some sense of freedom as well, all of which don't tend to sit well with a lot of kind of what Reza has recently called, I think it's Pete Wolfendale's term originally, critical reflexes on the left. Okay, so basically, let's talk about what a platform actually is before I get to any more of that. So, I mean, the term platform has been around for a while in its current sense, but it's become particularly prominent in sort of tech business literature, which is driven by engineering and sort of subscribes to a kind of default free market economic vocabulary. But I mean, what a platform is still what it originally meant when the word emerged in English in the theatre in the 1500s, which is a spatial structure that hosts external activity. I mean, a platform in a theatre was a stage. And more generally, it's a set of relatively fixed components which not only become sort of involved in diverse behaviours around it, but actually enable those behaviours. In the obvious example of the stage, like the fact that it's a clear space and it has certain affordances to be able to bring people on, take people off, put up stage dressing and so on. In the kind of literature where it's been discussed at length, which doesn't lack sophistication, although it's a sophistication of a very particular kind, it's usual to advance software businesses of various kinds, especially social networks like Facebook, as examples of what a platform is today. So with Facebook, you have a core of a platform, which involves proprietary source code, data centers, algorithms, an organizational structure, brand, and this kind of thing. And it's windowed with various kinds of interfaces that allow people sort of selective access to that core. So there's the user interface with which we're all familiar. There's also an API for app developers. And we'd be remiss not to mention there also appear to be backdoors for intelligent agencies, like permanent wiretaps built into it and this kind of thing as well. But what makes Facebook a platform is the fact that you have this core and then other people can come along, and it's designed so that people can pick it up and use it within their own projects. There's no real kind of appropriate use of what Facebook is. There's only a compatibility requirement that whatever you do operates through certain channels. So rather than specifying an appropriate use in advance, it solicits appropriation, basically. Now, platforms in general, I think the concept of platform is much richer than is kind of acknowledged in the literature where it's largely discussed. And the platform, in a sense, it certainly doesn't have to be an enormously complicated, sort of infrastructural ecology of various actors and this kind of thing. It can be honed right down, to as I say, its original meaning of the stage. You can really anything can be understood as a platform, insofar as the platform generalizes the principle of the lever. So it's a kind of island of predictability and stability, a patch of kind of resistance in the world, which is precisely what it enables it to kind of host other behaviors and to make them possible. So the configuration of a platform is that if you're able to know what it does and how it behaves, if not necessarily how it works in any deeper way, then you're able to kind of leverage it within your own projects. So as this can really apply to anything, any kind of object, any kind of process, and so on, can be understood as a platform. And an object achieves the status of a platform really in the moment of its operationalization through appropriation, which is something like actually the basic gesture of artifice, I think, sort of taking something and saying, well, what can me plus this object do, and how can I reconfigure this object to be a part of this particular project. So far, I mean, so much of fashionable concern with infrastructure, basically, which is something which a lot of people are talking about, futurists and so-called futurists, and this kind of thing. The infrastructures that underpin our everyday life, and in various stages of dereliction, or especially like how do you produce new ones when large-scale investment and coordination is necessary to produce them, but the whole idea of planning them seems ridiculously heuristic. And I think it has a more general relevance, as I'll endeavour to describe as well. So, platforms really haven't had. I was having a conversation with Ben Bratton and Nick Cernacek about this, and both of them made the point that platforms really haven't had a Hayek or a Hobbes or a Marx or like another figure that has really kind of like grasped them and explored the implications of them. And I think that perhaps this is merited in the case of the platform, as I'll describe. So the reason why I think they're so important is because they show a particular kind of logic at work, which is logic that William Wimsatt, the philosopher of engineering, calls generative entrenchment. So if a platform produces new behavioral possibilities, it also organizes them to some extent. But if it's kind of works by fixing behavior to some extent, it doesn't kind of rule by decree. It doesn't over-determine, as I was saying. In fact, it under-determines how it's going to be used. But the very fact that one's behavior has to be compatible with it exerts a kind of shaping effect. And this allows it to kind of infiltrate the projects in which a platform is implicated. It becomes incorporated, and under certain conditions becomes not just integrated into whatever project or process, but actually integral to it. So this is what Wimsatt understands to be a principle of generative entrenchment, basically. And generative entrenchment describes the way in which some kind of system of whatever material, some element is taken up, and then other things are built on top of it and come to rely on it. So this process embeds a component in the system, making it more and more important, even though it may have initially been trivial. And this works because the process of entrenchment is generative. Some kind of component, the original platform, precipitates other phenomena around it, and then becomes necessary part of the structure, in a sense. So the idea of the platform is extremely extensive from that point of view. It sort of grasps through the functionalist language that someone like Wimsatt or William Bechtel uses, but not only in terms of artificial systems and so on. In fact, it's kind of got an incredibly broad remit. I mean, you can understand like DNA, for instance, to have operated as a platform precipitating certain other developments. The same with photosynthesis, or the tetrapedal body plan of organisms that emerged in the Cambrian explosion, and so on. In each of these cases, you had some kind of development which may have been trivial originally, but then it became an essential component of things which over time accumulated on top of it, and it became thoroughly embedded them and incredibly difficult to extract usually. The problem of extracting a platform from a situation in which it's generatively entrenched is the proverbial problem of rebuilding a ship while you're sailing it, or relaying the foundations of a house while you're inside it. And in fact, this goes, I think, just as kind of aside, but I think this probably goes all the way down to notoriously difficult systems which humans can't find, which are involved in social functioning very deeply and inextricably, but are also very difficult to understand. So things like language, for instance. I suspect that the resistance the language has to kind of absolute formalization is part of the means by which it's kind of generatively entrenched. It can be understood to the level where it can be played with, it can be adapted and so on, but it would be very difficult to actually sort of fuck with the basic syntax and grammar and this kind of thing of a language that you speak in profound kind of ways. That's just an aside about kind of like the limits of the platform and the way in which certain platforms may actually become embedded for a long period of time, precisely because they're so difficult to extract and they're so rich in their generative possibilities at the same time. So this means, from kind of like a more active participatory position, rather than just thinking about it as you know, an interesting way to understand a particular system dynamic, is the idea of platform design as an operationalization of generative entrenchment. And this is basically an organization like Facebook fully expresses this kind of project, where it's deliberately set up not only to allow people to appropriate it, but to be able to record and metricate their appropriation so that its internal structure can be adapted in future to more effectively catch a wider range of behaviors. And you see this in systems like Facebook or in digital tech software in general, because the time frames are very compressed in terms of their evolution. They're very kind of light. They easily proliferate through the internet, digital network protocols, and so on. But it's more generally present. It's kind of like a logic of the Industrial Revolution, actually, like really brings it to the fore. It's interesting how many 19th century industrialists, right through to kind of early modernists, the Bauhaus and so on, would talk about, you know, a genuine ambition that they had in order to reformat bits and pieces of people's lives through, you know, providing certain kinds of environments and this sort of thing that would enable new behaviors. But there's something very interesting, I think, and more significant than, you know, the fact that we can set up systems in order to capture, or to attempt to capture these kinds of dynamics, which is that platforms actually reformat in a subtle but important way certain particular Western habits of thought, especially the relationship between means and ends. So we're used to the idea that practical activity is somehow secondary, as in the formulation of, you have theory and practice, or idea and application, design and implementation, and so on. So there's a sort of habit which you especially find in kind of political philosophy and so on, of like specifying ends and states of affairs that should be brought about with the hope that some kind of means will be able to affect them. And from that position, you know, success is judged by the degree to which you can approach, you know, a given end, like a picture of the world as you want it to be. But the platform kind of demands a reversal of this thinking, a swapping out of the priority of means and ends. So instead of elaborating an end and aligning means in order to pursue it, with a platform you begin with means and ask how you can move outwards from there. This tends to yield logics which are kind of cryptic to a lot of you know, kind of popular discourse about how things actually work in the world. I'll stick with the example of Facebook just because it's it's an easy one. Facebook came into an awful lot of flack a couple of years ago because they developed a presentation around capturing the next billion users, as they put it, in Africa and Southeast Asia and so on. And people were saying at the time, like, you've just gone, going through an IPO process, and like you don't actually have any kind of, you can't say why you want to get all these people using Facebook. But from a perspective within platform logic, like that's simply a nonsensical question. The fact that if you build the system, then people will take it up and will use it if you configure it effectively, and opportunities will show themselves. You are banking here on the unseen. Or the unforeseen. You're making contingency and the limits of your own ability to predict part of a structured plan in order to develop some kind of infrastructure which will achieve its value through time. It will bring about its reason for being through its adoption and its use or its appropriation, not through pre-specification. And it's striking that when organizations really recognize platform logic and pursue it, not only does it yield these kind of like cryptic scenarios, or apparently cryptic scenarios, but it also it kind of loosens the role of ends as specific ends as things to achieve. The logic alien to any kind of, like designated finish line after which a project is complete. They tend to elaborate ends only in the most general terms. In the case of companies like Google or Facebook, I mean, Google has this mission statement to organize the world's information. And that's it. Presumably the world isn't just the planetary surface either, seeing as they're getting into backing various deep space industries like planetary resources. And so from their perspective, like what is stated as an end is really like an ongoing, minimal degree of coherence that allows a collective to be to coordinate their activities as part of this project, rather than the attainment of fixed specific ends, which only become really relevant as ways to metricate progress, as ways to kind of like incite or define the pursuit of possibilities. In fact, this actually kind of resembles the original meaning of ambition, as in going around, which the word literally means, with the kind of implication that one goes around in order to drum up support for an agenda. But more generally, this this reformatted relationship to the future, where we don't try and pursue a utopia, but rather find ways to like leverage ourselves out of the present, is expressed in the idea of the platform. I mean, the platform is a means to escape the present or crowbar open the future. It's not a plan in the same kind of rigorous, robust way, but rather a completely different kind of logic that sort of unfolds, which can be adopted, I think, as a kind of central device for a certain kind of thought. In particular, it's an essential conceptual device in what is ended up being called accelerationism, which, as you guys know, has various models on the market at present. There's kind of like Landian Shogothic capitalism. There's the Cernicek-Williams Red Plenty kind of model. There's Reza's recent writing about a self-constructing, revising intelligence, and so on. And what these things really have in common is that they try to align with the generative forces of what we tend to call modernity. They start with an attempt to grasp how things get done. They are interested in efficacious means at the beginning and work outwards from there. Say, not what kind of world we want to live in, but like actually how do we get things done, and how can we move, with that knowledge, like what are the possibilities that can be opened up, how can they be multiplied and pursued. And this, I think, concept of the platform not only kind of captures that, but it also gives us an opportunity to reformat quite very extant structures which are in fact used as platforms both conceptually and physically. So things like the idea of markets and so on can be seen effectively as different forms of platform which have certain zones of complicity or compatibilities, but also conflicts and so on. And by recasting them in this sense, you can say, well, not only are they deeply embedded, and gives an appreciation of the possibility of unpicking them, but that other alternatives are actually possible according to this general scheme. I'm not going to say, I don't know what they are, but it at least, I think, enables us to kind of rethink our relationships to these things, not as necessary constraints, but as reconfigurable platforms, which can be deviated, modulated, and so on through various forms of intervention. That's it from me.
Thank you. So this is going to be a response by Julieta Aranda, who is an artist born in Mexico City, who currently lives and works between Berlin and New York. Central to Aranda's multidimensional practice are her involvement with circulation mechanisms, her interest on science fiction, space travel, zones of friction, and her interest on possibilities for the production of political subjectivities by way of all of the above. As a director of eFlux, together with Anton, Julieta has developed the projects Time Bank Pawn Shop and eFlux Video Rental, all of which started in the eFlux storefront in New York and have traveled to many venues worldwide. Since 2008, Julieta Aranda has been the editor of eFlux Journal, together with Anton and Brian Quanwood. Thank you. In welcoming her.
Hello, am I there? I hope I am there.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. I guess I will have to start with a bit of a disclaimer. Unfortunately,
You can hear.
no. No.
I think you did the same mistake. You changed the.
No. No. Actually, this sometimes happens on Hangouts. I hope that is not what is happening right now. Every once in a great while, because I can hear Julieta perfectly. Can the other people on the panel hear Julieta?
Hello.
Yeah, other people are indicating that they can hear her. For some reason, it is not coming through to the conference through that particular computer.
Can we reboot and ask her to stop? We just do a reboot and then we'll do it because people are eager to hear her.
Another way that we can do it is that Julieta can call my phone and I can hold it up to the computer. It will sound just fine.
Let's just reboot. I think rebooting is better. People refuse to do the phone here. Well, just text her on the side and say just stop and then we'll reboot.
Okay.
Please, I can do that too, but I just can't find a window.
It's just that it would be a lot faster, but sure. And plus, there's no guarantee that rebooting will fix anything. Just so you know, because that's one of the problems with Hangouts. This happens occasionally.
So what do I do?
Because we need to do this anyways, right? Because we're rebooting. You just want to
Actually, Mohammed, let's do it like this. You already have two computers that are up, so let's let's try to make the sound come through the other computer.
We can't do that because the whole thing is like rigid.
Okay.
Like we're dealing with like structural limitations here. We're back to all this talks, right? Like there's like on the level of structure is impossible.
Okay.
Just one sec. Let's see. We're gonna try something. We're gonna use the power of concept to get over like the structural limitations. Let's see.
I'm gonna just be counting out loud, and then somebody just tells me when they can hear me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Okay, can you hear me?
I hear everybody.
Okay, you're coming through fine, so go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so after all this, I have to start with a disclaimer because unfortunately I did not have access to Reza's presentation in advance, so I am not talking directly about computation of Turing machines, but I am rather responding in a more general sense to certain ideas that have been put out by Reza and that I would want to have opened up a bit more. For this I'm drawing both from the text Death as Perversion, Openness and Learning Like That, which was published in the book Dark Trajectories, and also from the recent text The Labor of the Inhuman, which was published in 2 parts on the last 2 issues of Inflexione, and I hope there will be some conceptual overlap so I don't come off as being in the wrong party entirely, and if I do, please accept my apologies. I will go back to myself for a little bit to explain what I'm tackling this from. As an artist, I tend to call myself a sculptor in the most omnivorous sense of the term, and this is a label that I use more to signal a relationship with the world than to signal an object-based production. That is to say, there is a conflation of material and of both material and immaterial means of production in my work, which I'm perfectly happy not to keep separate. Having witnessed the taking body of what we call the digital over the last 10 or 15 years, and both the material and the human cost, and I guess in this particular case, human cost can also be understood as a kind of material of the production of the digital and its circulation. Keeping digital and cognitive production in the realm of the immaterial seems disingenuous and unproductive to me. So, I cannot hear I'm hearing myself too many times, sorry. At this point, I would say I'm much more interested in the taking of the notion of both objects and tools, irrelevant of their solid forms, and the way these updated notions exert on the world. Or maybe this is also an investigation of what constitutes a solid body and how we negotiate the production processes of said body. So it is through this lens that I would like to explore the ramifications of the idea of inhumanism that Reza poses as a rational system of commitments to being human. In the text Death as Perversion, there is already the notion of a subversive commitment. There is the proposition of necrophilia as a radical openness and as a form of commitment to life in its most transformative sense, life that does not insist on retaining its original container or embodiment, and that thus is not extinguishable by the finitude of a given body, but it is instead committed to its own process of transformation and opens itself into the world by laying itself bare and becoming something else, and then something else, and then something else, and so on. So that would be that committed to life, not in the restricted sense of being committed to life as, say, life as trilobites, or life as woolly mammoths, or life as the specific understanding of the world that was prior to some of the man-made languages that are now extinct, but rather death executing a commitment to life understood as its next logical conclusion, and subsequently a commitment to all the logical conclusions that will come after that. What I find very potent in that text is the opposition that Reza presents of necrophilia vis-a-vis to the regime of necrocracy. And I may be way off the mark, forgive me if that is the case, but in this particular text I understand necrocracy as a politico-economical conservatism where that is presented as an inexorable terminal condition. And necrophilia, on the other hand, is presented not as the desire for death, but rather as the desire of death to germinate and open itself. The negation of a final extinction of intensity. So I see necrophilia as the manifestation of an omnivorous solidarity, a sort of machine of desire that cannot be extinguished. And I think what I want to focus on, moving on to the labor of the inhuman, is precisely this idea of solidarity, but I'm going to get to that in a moment. I would like to quote two short passages from the second part of the labor of the inhuman, coming from here. From a rational perspective, a commitment is seen as a cascade of ramifying paths that is in the process of expanding its frontiers, developing into an evolving landscape. Machine of desire that cannot be extinguished. And what I want to focus on, moving on to the labor of the inhuman. Am I coming through at all? Sorry. Because somebody can, I'm sorry, I think I lost myself. Can somebody come in?
No, it seemed like somebody opened a YouTube window and it was playing your like previous minutes, what other people are watching. Just you future caught up with the past.
Okay. So can I continue now? Okay. So,
Yes, please. Sorry about that.
okay.
Take off your headphone, apparently,
Okay.
and sit back from the microphone. That's what people say here. We are still privileging people here because people outside are hearing you perfectly. Because I checked it on YouTube, so it's like all like for here.
Okay. So then I'll go back again to where I was. I'm going to quote these two short passages from the second part of Labor of the Inhuman. The first is, from a rational perspective, a commitment is seen as a cascade of ramifying paths that is in the process of expanding its frontiers, developing into an evolving landscape, and moving its fixed perspectives, deracinating any form of rootedness associated with a fixed commitment or immutable responsibilities, revising links and addresses between its old and new commitments, and finally erasing any image of itself as what it was supposed to be. The second passage is, the practical elaboration of making a commitment to humanity is inhumanism. If making a commitment means fully elaborating the content of such a commitment, the consequent, what else, of what it means to be human, and if to be human means being able to enter the space of reason, then a commitment to humanity must fully elaborate how the abilities of reason functionally convert sentience to sapience. So, as I see it, the idea of radical openness that was already present in the previous text is, I lost myself again now. Sorry. So as I see, the idea of radical openness is being carried through, but there is a differentiation or an opposite, let's say, from the previous commitment that was described of death's commitment to life or death's commitment to being. As I understand, the commitment to human that Reza is proposing starts with the determination, with the delamination of being into sentience and sapience, and thus a commitment that's filtered through the space of reason, so to speak, and again in a way that is almost a commitment to sapience itself. Or as Reza put it in the text, it is a commitment to the autonomy of reason's revisionary program over which human has no hold. And here maybe is where I feel the need to slow down a little bit, because while I agree wholeheartedly with the need to constantly update and redefine the terms by which we define the world and ourselves and our relationships with the world, I also see the commitment to the revision and construction of the future as a political project, even at its most extreme and non-biological projection. And for me that entails the constant construction and revision of a political present, even if it is understood as in terms of a series of immediate futures. So I would like to look in closer detail to the possibility of commitment to human in terms of consecutive immediate futures. Going back to my interest in subjects that are being produced and that are producing themselves in the zones of actual friction, lately I have been fascinated by an interview which was given by a Brazilian crime boss directly from jail. And this is because it speaks to me about the problems in the construction of a political present. So I'm going to quote an excerpt from that. And this is a moment when a journalist is asking this gangster, basically, if he's afraid of dying. His response was, "It is you who are afraid of dying, not me. As a matter of fact, while I am here in jail, you cannot come in and kill me. But as soon as you leave, I can make a phone call and have you killed outside. We are human bombs. In the slums, there are 100,000 human bombs. We are in the center of the insoluble itself, really. You are stuck in a discourse concerning good and evil, and in between you and us, there is the frontier of death, the only frontier that matters. We are already a different species. We are already bugs. We are animals different from you. Death for you is a Christian drama that happens in bed, clutching a handkerchief during a heart attack. Death for us is a daily meal, wherever, however, laying on a beach, dumped in a mass grave. The enduring intellectuals used to talk about class struggle, about being on the fringe, about being heroes. Then it is we who arrive. My soldiers are strange anomalies in the distorted development of this country. No more proletarians or unhappy or exploited individuals. There is a third thing growing outside, cultivated in the mud, educated in the most absolute illiteracy, graduated in prisons like a monster alien hidden in the cracks of the city. A new language has emerged. It is this. It is other lingo. We are facing what I would call post-misery. That's it. The post-misery begets a new murderous culture, aided by modern technology, satellites, cellular phones, internet, modern weapons. It is shit, yes, but it is shit with solid-state hard drives, fast data transfer rates, and many terabytes of storage. My soldiers are a mutation of the social species. Their fungus growing on a great dirty mistake. And to go back to Reza, in the layer of the inhuman, Reza says that the task is to construct points of liaison, cognitive and practical channels, so as to enable communication between what we think of ourselves and what is becoming of us. And he also says that identifying ourselves as human is neither a sufficient condition for understanding what is becoming of us, nor a sufficient condition for recognizing what we are becoming, or more accurately, what is being born out of us. As I see it, this lack of recognition or understanding generates what I call the perspective of perspective, and that is a world that is mediated by a faulty image of the world. So, before considering going further into the claim for a functional autonomy of reason in the future, my questions are, how do we deal with the faulty image of the present if we don't want to simply chalk it as collateral damage in the process of production of the future? If without a we, there is no commitment to being human, how is this we being constructed? How can we think about solidarity in this process? And in what terms of solidarity? Would this be a solidarity to life, a solidarity to human, a solidarity to reason? In the updating of the present, is there still space for a collectivity and for the modes of engagement of what it would be to be a citizen, not a human, not a user, not a consumer, but for a citizen to be produced and updated, or rather to produce and update herself? And that would be my response. If anybody heard it, that is.
Thank you so much, Julieta. So I'm gonna step back. So maybe you wanna like put the sound back to the way it was. Thank you. So now over. Can you hear us? Because we went through some change here. I just want to make sure that you guys out there hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. So this machine probably. We may still not hear Julieta if she wants to speak later, but she can still hear us. So at this point, what we should do is go back and get all the other responses, basically responses that will begin with Danielle's response. So we have, why don't we start with somebody in the house? Ali, are you around? Okay. Do you want to come and remember to introduce yourself?
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for being partially still here. So my response to Daniel, before that introducing myself, I'm a practicing artist. I'm Ali Ahadi. Practicing artist holding some conditional interest for philosophy, or for what is known as conditions of philosophy, if you prefer. My practice is constituted through procedures of rambling through the interrelations between the extant concepts within aesthetics and contingent forms of abstraction that are not necessarily reducible to the conventional artistic determinations. Within politically charged situation, seeking to find a rupture that allows for transforming the information into the sensible. So, speaking of situation would take me to no one but Alain Badiou, whose conception of a situation, aka set, aka world, and politics as a truth procedure are extremely different with the political, and subsequently to the theory of subject, which all provided a base for my practice and my living in a hardcore fashion for a long time. My research during my studies in the MFA program at the UBC dealt with politics of subjectivization that was formalized in the form of paper in which I developed my thesis on the concept of ephemeral subject and precarious object and the ethics of rambling, which these days making me thinking of Nigoristani's idea of navigation. Getting back to Daniel's paper on what does it mean to think, and the tripartite that he draws about the historical relation between modern sciences and modern philosophy, from the orthodox to revisionists and to the post-revisionists. And I'm bringing the post-revisionist one to the light of a materialistic metaphysics. So my question for Daniel would side on the side of metaphysics, which I can start by considering the history of metaphysics from a Kantian reading of it as the realm of the inaccessible, to the traditional positivist reading of metaphysics, as Auguste Comte would put it in that way, which says metaphysics as metaphysic party as a form of mental illness that naturally inhere in our mental evolution. And finally, a dialectical critic of metaphysics like Hegel, Marx, even Nietzsche, that considers metaphysics as a complete mutilation of a form of thought, that dismisses the constant becoming of ideas that are the result of the contradictions against and over of the unilateral entities within a situation. So having said that, all these critiques towards metaphysics, and now coming to the conclusion about a materialistic reading of metaphysics, my question to Daniel would be that where does your metaphysics, your materialistic metaphysics, set its boundaries? Or I can put it in this way, that where is the edge of the outside for you, outside of this thinker creature, be it a Homo sapient or a sapient? According to the tripartite and the history that you were drawing. The second question, and if your metaphysics is a materialist one, and if the ontology, first of all, is your metaphysics can be a synonym with an ontology? So, if your ontology is mathematizable, then what would potentiate the necessity of substituting this with epistemic strategies to understand that what are the criteria in which, or what criteria need to be met that we can calculate or the ability of a sapient as a thinker. Then go into the other steps, that whether we can replicate this, this faculty into other material configurations, like, as I said, engineering, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. And the last question, that what is your subject? The subject that you're talking about, is the form of being that I assume not. Is it a state or a process in which a body is in the process of being constructed? What is the concept of this subject in this elaboration of thinking? What are its software, hardware qualities? Can it be explained that this human thinking can be explained in a functional way or in a material way, this subjective state of thinking? So again, reviewing the question, what is your metaphysics and what is the materialistic metaphysics, and where are its boundaries, and where is the edge of the outside of this situation? Is it the metaphysics towards a situation, a world, a multiplicity, or something that is out there and it's ultimately talking about the being as a whole, as a one? Yeah, pretty much these are my questions. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
So yeah, like I said, I really just have three kind of brief, I have more questions than a response for Daniel. So the first question is if maybe you could talk a little bit more, unpack a little bit the way you sort of understand the feedback loop between, on the one hand, understanding the functional levels of human cognition, sort of in the service of constructing AI, and on the other hand, constructing AI in order to understand the functional levels of human cognition. So there's a kind of, I sort of sense this dialectic cropping up, I know, in your work and in Ray's work as well. The second question would be, I was wondering if maybe you could get a little more specific about actually what type of artificial intelligence we're talking about. You know, whether we're talking about discrete, localized artificial intelligences meant for kind of pragmatic, specific purposes, or are we talking about AGI, artificial general intelligence, because they both have quite different, quite unique demands and commitments. And then I guess the third question would be sort of touching on Lorenzo Magnani's work on distributed cognition. If, in a sense, the further we, let's say, understand and describe and at a certain point leap to construct artificial intelligence, if in some sense thinking and thought might become more and more diffuse by way of this kind of trajectory towards artificial general intelligence. So those are my three questions, really.
Thank you. You were very brief. I just wish you also introduced yourself because people want. I didn't get a chance to introduce you.
I thought there had already been the introduction. I'm sorry.
So you want to do that so people know who you are?
It's fine. I'm Brian Rogers. I'm an artist and writer based in San Francisco and Beirut. I work kind of between new media, performance, and writing and sound. And yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. So why don't we move forward with responses to or questions for Benedict. I see Gelare there, and probably Sam is around too. I'm not sure. But let's start with the one we see. That's Sam, right?
Sam's not here.
Okay, why don't we get Gelare then?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Gelare. I'm an artist and a translator, and I also write, and I'm based in Los Angeles. I have a couple of short questions in regards to Benedict's presentation, and first, I'll start with the first one. From what I understand, you kind of presume an inherent quality of permutability or a kind of malleability in the entity of platform, and through this process of the entrenchment, where according to you, and obviously the platform gets integrated and integral into the structure, the platform also goes through a kind of transformation. And my question is that, do you see this possible or helpful to think of designing platforms where we can ultimately move away from, a kind of platform that after the process of the entrenchment, we will be able to, the structure itself will be able to live as an autonomous entity. and for that to be an answer or a solution to the limits of the platform and its compatibility and the limitations that it brings. And so my second question is I was wondering, it's a question of neutrality, and it might sound like a basic question, but I was wondering if you also think of neutrality to be a requirement or an inherent quality to the entity of the platform. Because I got really excited about this whole idea of potentially looking at every object as a platform, because coming from where I come from, it's also very, to me, it's like a querying of the objects. And I was thinking of, I was just going on and on, and I was thinking of all these different things as platforms. And off the top of my head, I was thinking of, drone technology as a platform, or war as a platform, or contemporary art as a platform. And it was just fun to think about that and imagine its own hardware and software and OS and incompatibility issues and all of that. So yeah, I guess those two, the question of neutrality, and my first question, if it's possible to design platforms where we can ultimately move away from and kind of shed a skin, so that the platform will be exactly like a train platform, where you use it to get on a train, and once you're on a train, you leave it behind. You don't even need to even think about the platform anymore. And if that's possible, or if what do you think about that? So those are my questions.
Thank you. So to move forward, is Sam around? I don't see Sam in the room, because Sam was going to also respond to Benedict, but he was in the last session, but I just don't see him here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think it's a question of maybe actually no. We'll have Jason. Jason R. Jason, why don't you start, and then maybe if Gelare leaves and watches the video on YouTube, then maybe there's going to be room enough for Sam to join, because I think Sam wants to join. It's just that the room is full. Yeah. Okay, Jason, you're on. Jason's going to respond, or introduce himself, and then hopefully respond. Go ahead.
Me. Right? You're talking to me, right?
Yes,
Mohammad?
we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a few Jasons around. So, hello everyone, and hi Mohammed. Thanks again for the invitation to the conference. It's been great so far. So, my name is Jason Lariviere. I'm a PhD student at NYU, and I'm currently working on a dissertation project which looks at questions at the intersection of technical compression, media art, and non-standard or specifically Laurelian aesthetics. So basically things that Alexander was talking about in his talk last night. So it was nice to hear that and all the great responses to that. And so I've been asked to respond to Nick's paper presented earlier today, and I mostly just want to underscore his emphasis on the importance of the concept of modeling in the current conditions of the overdeveloped world. I think he's absolutely right to point out the impasses of left politics of late, including what he called the, quote, romanticism of endless insurrections, the ephemeral protest of horizontal movements, as well as the retreat into small-scale localism. As someone that lives in Brooklyn, I can attest to the utter bankruptcy of the last tactic in particular. I think Nick's call to rethink the Promethean venture, to think it beyond its heretofore limited potential, is extremely important today. As he said, we are already Promethean. The question remains as to what kind of Prometheanism we ought to strive for. To that end, I'd like to address, in my brief remarks here, the recent enthusiasm around strands of the so-called accelerationism a body of thought that seems to animate this conference in some significant way. So many of its critics have dismissed accelerationism as the great white hope of contemporary Marxists, dispirited by the juggernaut of techno-industrial neoliberal capitalism, and have pointed toward a barely sublimated messianism in its futurist visions. I want to be clear that that's not what I want to do in these brief remarks. My purpose here is to raise a more pragmatic set of concerns informed by contemporary geopolitical, environmental, and resource-related factors. Stated briefly, these concerns would be the following. So one, many experts on the petroleum situation already predict that we've passed peak production and that we have very little time to A, develop an alternative equivalent energy source, or B, get the necessary infrastructure that it would require to function up and running before the global technological grid suffers potentially catastrophic energetic supply shortages, possibly including the wholesale collapse of global civilization. And here we might think of the work of Richard Heinberg in particular. The latter situation might necessitate an attempt to actually slow down petroleum consumption long enough to keep industrial R&D up and running and an alternate and preferably renewable energy source or sources. In the meantime, we also have the climate situation to worry about, and this too seems like something that is going to require a globally coordinated response, entailing the necessity of an actually functional global communication grid and the continued existence of high technology. All these factors would seem to indicate that a massive acceleration of technological change and migration to off-world colonies are both unfeasible and potentially dangerous in the context of the current global energy and environmental situations. Perhaps instead, what we need is a sort of moderated acceleration of certain types of change, such as alternate energy and climate change response and adaptation, supplemented by a slowdown at the level of fossil fuel consumption, which in turn might entail that we scrap certain futurist visions whose actualization might require huge energy expenditures, such as visions of post-humanistic space migration, for example. On top of this, the social situation produced by the chaotic collapse of industrial societies would likely result in an ugly mixture of mass social scapegoating, finding someone to blame for the crisis, the eruption of irrational or apocalyptic religious energies, and the rise of fascist movements. And this in turn might encourage global elites to deal with resource depletion and its resultant social tensions through war. And I think we've seen this, this scenario play out before. So again, is an imperative to accelerate the best imperative we can find now? And is the accelerationist motto that the only way to collapse is to accelerate it, when accompanied by a flirtation with nihilist tendencies, possibly a sort of psychological insurance policy, whereby if accelerationist policies are actually implemented and result in a massive global catastrophe, the accelerationists can claim that this is what we were aiming for all along. That is, in the few moments that will remain for such retrospection. I want to briefly then, in conclusion, point to the kind of moderated dialectical acceleration that I think should guide us going forward. This is by way of a kind of a bibliographical plug, not that he needs it, to Frederick Jameson, in particular his essay, Utopia as Replication, which is in the collection Valences of the Dialectic. Now this is Jameson at his most accelerationist, where he wants to, as he puts it, think quantity positively. So this echoes for me with what Nick was saying about facing up to the complex quantities of current capitalism and not rejecting them out of hand. Jameson's perverse gambit in this essay is to put forth Walmart as a utopian phenomenon. Nick mentioned that Walmart engages in firm-level planning, and I'm not sure if this is where he was trying to go with this. I'd be interested to see the longer version of his paper. In thinking the dialectical reversals of planetary economic modeling. But I'd just like to end by quoting a particularly powerful passage from Jameson's essay here, which I think speaks to a number of salient issues which have come up in the conference so far. So this is Jameson in this essay, Replication as Utopia. He says, I am tempted to add something about the ambivalence of the dialectic itself, particularly with respect to technological innovation. It is enough to recall the admiration of Lenin and Gramsci for Taylorism and Fordism to be perplexed at this weakness of revolutionaries for what is most exploitative and dehumanizing in the working life of capitalism. But this is precisely what is meant by utopian here. Namely, that what is currently negative can also be imagined as positive, in that immense changing of the valences, which is the utopian future. And this is the way I want us to consider Walmart, however briefly. Namely, as a thought experiment, not after Lenin's crude but practical fashion, as an institution faced with which, after the revolution, we can lop off what capitalistically mutilates this excellent apparatus, but rather as what Raymond Williams called the emergent, as opposed to the residual. The shape of a utopian future looming through the mist, which we must seize as an opportunity to exercise the utopian imagination more fully, rather than an occasion for moralizing judgments or regressive nostalgia. So I think this is precisely the kind of thought experiments that we need to be engaging with at this time. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. And sorry for delay of getting you to respond to Nick.
Oh, that's okay.
So Sam, are you ready? Sam Forsyth, there we go. The true robotic man. We can't hear you.
Yeah.
There it is. Now, please introduce yourself first.
Hi, I'm Sam, and I'm an artist working between new media and performance. I collaborate with Brian Rogers sometimes, who spoke earlier, along with some other people. And my response is to Benedict, and because there have already been a lot of really good questions, and there's probably more to come, I'm going to keep it pretty brief. My sort of question, or I suppose sort of interrogation for Ben would be, what struck me about the idea of this sort of a platform, or I was thinking if it were a verb, this kind of platforming, is that it seems to, rather than rely on prior commitments to some kind of position, it relies on commitments to sort of methods exclusive of any kind of original position or some kind of ideological commitments. So if platforming, or if the orientation towards the appropriation of platform as some kind of pirate takeover, or some kind of like constant jumping ship in order to always redesign and reappropriate anything that you can come across that seems to be sort of provide some kind of efficacy, what might be the conceptual methods for not constantly being overridden by the conditions that you're experiencing on whatever it is, whatever ship you happen to jump onto? The example of language was very interesting, in that in order to constantly try and reappropriate language, you always encounter, I suppose, sort of traps and pitfalls. And I suppose if you were going to look at system building, or the idea of moving into or appropriating, or I suppose even just taking on the methods of what one could perceive as a platform that's already given, what sort of, I suppose, theoretical methods could one deploy in order to constantly always already be in the act of trying to deal with whatever traps and pitfalls you could encounter, while simultaneously sort of repurposing it for your ends? I suppose the metaphor of trying to rebuild the boat while you're sailing it is a good example. So If my question has made any sense at all, then I suppose that's it.